While you were scrolling, a financial earthquake just started rumbling beneath the global economy. BRICS nations launched something called the Unit, a gold-backed digital settlement tool designed to do one thing: sideline the US dollar. And most people have no idea it's already being tested. Here's what you need to understand right now. A quiet revolution is taking shape in global finance, and it's not making headlines. No press conferences, no dramatic announcements. Just cold, calculated moves by some of the world's most powerful economies. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Together with a growing list of partner nations, they've begun testing a new digital financial instrument. It's called the Unit. And no, it's not another cryptocurrency trying to pump on Twitter. It's not some speculative tech gimmick. This is a serious gold-backed settlement currency built for one strategic purpose: to reduce the world's dependency on the US dollar. Now, before you roll your eyes and think this is just another "the dollar is dying" clickbait story, let me give you some numbers that should make you pause. 90%. That's how much trade between Russia and China now happens without using a single US dollar. Let that sink in. Two of the largest economies on Earth have almost entirely bypassed the currency that has dominated global trade for nearly 80 years. Meanwhile, back in the United States, the national debt has ballooned to roughly $38 trillion. Whether you think that's sustainable or catastrophic depends on who you ask. But either way, it's a staggering figure that's raising eyebrows in finance ministries from New Delhi to Brasilia. Behind closed doors, something profound is happening. A parallel financial architecture is being constructed, piece by piece, and the foundation was just laid. To grasp why this matters, we need to rewind the clock. Picture the world in 1944. Europe is in ruins. Entire cities have been leveled. Economies are shattered. The global order is broken. In the quiet mountains of New Hampshire, at a resort called Bretton Woods, leaders from 44 nations gathered to rebuild the international monetary system from scratch. They made a decision that would shape the next century, anchor the world economy to the US dollar. Why the dollar? Because at that moment, America was the most stable, most productive, and most financially sound nation on the planet. The dollar was directly convertible to gold. If you held dollars, you could, in theory, exchange them for actual gold bars stored in U.S. vaults. It was trust made tangible. Even after President Nixon severed that gold link in 1971, ending what's known as the gold standard, the dollar didn't lose its grip. It tightened it. Oil became priced in dollars. Central banks around the world stockpiled dollars in their reserves. When countries traded with each other, they usually settled in dollars, even if neither nation was the United States. This gave Washington an almost unimaginable advantage. Economists have a term for it: exorbitant privilege. Because everyone needed dollars, the U.S. government could borrow enormous sums of money at lower interest rates than anyone else. It could run deficits that would cripple other nations without facing the same consequences. The dollar's dominance wasn't just economic, it was geopolitical power in its purest form. But that power came with a darker side. When you control the currency the world uses, you control access to the global financial system. And the United States has not been shy about using that leverage. International payments don't just float through the air. They move through networks, clearing systems, and messaging platforms. The most important of these is called SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. It's essentially the nervous system of global banking. If you're cut off from SWIFT, you're cut off from the world. In February 2022, when Russian forces invaded Ukraine, Western nations responded with financial warfare. They froze roughly $300 billion of Russia's foreign currency reserves. They expelled major Russian banks from SWIFT. Overnight, Russia was locked out of large parts of the international financial system. Now, whether you support those sanctions or not isn't the point. The point is what other countries learned by watching. They learned that access to the dollar system isn't a right. It's a privilege that can be revoked. They learned that if you fall out of favor with Washington, your reserves can be frozen, your banks can be isolated, and your economy can be strangled, all without a single missile being fired. For nations sitting on the fence, particularly those in the global south, this was a jarring reminder, and it prompted a simple, rational question. What if we built our own system? That's where the unit enters the picture. Developed with assistance from a research organization called the International Research Institute for Advanced Systems, the unit isn't designed to replace your local money. You won't be buying coffee with it. Your salary won't be paid in it. It's built for something bigger: cross-border settlement between governments and major corporations. Here's the concept. Right now, if Brazil wants to buy oil from Russia, it's a messy process. Brazil has to convert its currency, the real, into US dollars. Then those dollars get converted into Russian rubles. The transaction passes through multiple banks, often in New York or London. Fees pile up. Time is wasted. And every step of that process goes through infrastructure the United States can monitor or block. With the unit, that entire chain is cut short. Brazil and Russia settle the trade directly, using a digital instrument both recognize. No dollars, no middlemen, no exposure to sanctions. What makes the unit unique is how it's structured. Roughly 40% of its value is backed by physical gold. The other 60% is pegged to a basket of BRICS member currencies: the yuan, the ruble, the rupee, the real, and the rand. Gold has been trusted for millennia. It doesn't depend on any government's promises. By anchoring the unit partly in gold, BRICS is signaling stability and independence. And by blending in their own national currencies, they're distributing influence across the bloc, rather than concentrating it in one country. This isn't just theory. It's already in motion. For years now, BRICS nations have been quietly constructing their own financial plumbing. China launched CIPS, the cross-border interbank payment system, to handle yuan transactions independently of Western networks. Russia, after being hit with sanctions, developed SPFS, its own domestic alternative to SWIFT. India's UPI, the Unified Payments Interface, is expanding beyond its borders, enabling real-time digital payments across countries. These aren't isolated projects. They're being linked together, forming the skeleton of a parallel financial system. Then there's the New Development Bank, sometimes called the BRICS Bank. It was set up as an alternative to institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. And increasingly, it's issuing loans not in dollars, but in local currencies. The data backs this up. Trade between Russia and China, once dominated by the dollar, now flows almost entirely in rubles and yuan. Across BRICS nations, the share of intra-bloc trade conducted in dollars has dropped sharply. This doesn't mean the dollar is about to vanish, but it does mean the scaffolding for an alternative is already being erected. India's position in all this is fascinating. Unlike China or Russia, India maintains deep ties with the West. It's part of the Quad alliance with the US, Japan, and Australia. It buys American military equipment. Its tech industry is intertwined with Silicon Valley. Yet India is also a founding member of BRICS. It trades heavily with Russia and China. And Indian officials have made it clear they're not interested in choosing sides. They're interested in options. Publicly, New Delhi has praised the dollar's role in maintaining global financial stability. But behind the scenes, India is actively exploring non-dollar trade arrangements. It's expanding rupee-based trade with Russia. It's testing digital settlement systems with Southeast Asian neighbors. India isn't leading a revolt against the dollar, it's hedging. And in geopolitics, hedging is often the smartest play. The United States is not sitting idle. Former President Donald Trump has floated the idea of imposing severe tariffs on any nation that moves away from the dollar. The message is blunt. If you abandon our currency, we'll make it expensive. That might work in the short term. Economic pressure can slow momentum. But there's a deeper irony at play here. The very reason BRICS nations are seeking alternatives is because they feel the dollar is being weaponized. And when the U.S. responds to diversification efforts with threats, it reinforces that exact narrative. It validates the criticism. It pushes neutral countries to think twice about putting all their eggs in one basket. Indonesia has already stated it has no interest in full dollarization. South Africa is moving cautiously, avoiding dramatic declarations. Even Brazil, once vocal about challenging dollar dominance, has softened its rhetoric. Why? Because these nations understand the risks, but they also understand the writing on the wall. Let's talk about the elephant in the room: America's debt. The United States now owes more than $38 trillion. That breaks down to roughly $114,000 for every single American citizen. The debt-to-GDP ratio is hovering around 120%, levels not seen since the aftermath of World War II. Janet Yellen, who served as both Federal Reserve Chair and Treasury Secretary, has warned about something called fiscal dominance. That's when government borrowing becomes so large that it starts to constrain the central bank's ability to manage inflation. In plain English, the debt gets so massive that traditional tools for stabilizing the economy stop working. Right now, the U.S. government is paying close to $1 trillion a year just in interest on that debt. That's more than it spends on several major budget categories. And those costs are climbing. For foreign governments holding dollar reserves, this raises uncomfortable questions. Is this sustainable? What happens if confidence cracks? Meanwhile, BRICS nations have been stockpiling gold. Collectively, they hold over 6,000 tons. China has been adding to its reserves month after month. Analysts are forecasting gold could hit $4,000 an ounce by mid-2026, driven by demand for assets that don't depend on any government's balance sheet. The unit isn't a revolution, it's preparation. Now, let's pump the brakes. Predictions of the dollar's imminent collapse are overblown. The US dollar is still involved in nearly 90% of all foreign exchange transactions. It accounts for roughly 57% of global reserves. It remains the most liquid, most trusted, and most widely accepted currency on the planet. Diversification is real, but it's slow. There are massive structural obstacles to rapid change. BRICS is not a unified bloc. India and China have serious territorial disputes. Brazil's economy swings wildly. Russia is under crushing sanctions. Building a shared currency among countries with conflicting interests and competing priorities is enormously complex. Even officials within BRICS have downplayed the idea of a common currency anytime soon. Moreover, no other currency matches the dollar's functionality. The Chinese yuan is still subject to capital controls. The Russian ruble is toxic in most markets. The Indian rupee isn't fully convertible. Gold is valuable as a reserve, but it's impractical for daily trade. The dollar's dominance is built on deep financial markets, rock-solid legal frameworks, and network effects. People use it because everyone else already does. Breaking that cycle takes time. History offers a lesson. When the euro launched in 1999, many predicted it would erode dollar dominance. More than 2 decades later, it holds about 20% of global reserves. Important? Yes, but not a replacement. So, the real question isn't if change is happening, it's how fast. Certain indicators would signal acceleration. First, energy markets. Oil has been priced in dollars for decades, and that creates constant global demand for the currency. If major exporters start settling energy deals in yuan, rubles, or units, that's a structural shift. Second, central bank reserves. IMF data shows the dollar's share has declined from 72% in 2000 to about 57% today. A drop below 50% would be a psychological and practical milestone. Third, payment systems. As China's CIPS and BRICS settlement networks grow, they become more viable. Network effects work both ways. The more participants join, the more useful they become. Fourth, Gold purchases. Central banks have been buying gold at record levels, and that's a hedge against currency risk. And fifth, U.S. fiscal stability. A debt crisis or loss of confidence in treasury markets could accelerate everything overnight. What we're witnessing isn't a sudden collapse. It's a slow-motion transition toward a more fragmented, multipolar financial world. The system built after World War II is evolving. The dollar still enjoys unmatched liquidity and integration, but cracks are forming. Internal divisions among BRICS nations limit how fast they can move, but momentum is building. Reserve currency transitions don't happen quickly. The British pound dominated global finance for over a century before gradually yielding to the dollar. These shifts often look subtle for years, until they hit a tipping point. The unit and other BRICS initiatives may not signal the end of dollar supremacy, but they mark the beginning of something new. A world where financial power is more distributed, where countries have more choices, and where the monopoly on global money is no longer guaranteed. So here's where we are. A gold-backed digital settlement tool is being tested by some of the world's largest economies. Payment networks are being connected. Gold reserves are being built. Trade patterns are shifting. None of this guarantees the dollar's demise. But it does mean the world is preparing for a future where the dollar is no longer the only game in town. The question isn't whether alternatives will exist. They already do. The question is whether they'll gain enough traction to fundamentally reshape how the world does business. And that answer won't come from speeches or predictions. It'll come from the cold, hard choices governments make when the pressure is on. The unit is just one piece of a much larger puzzle, but it's a piece that tells us something important. The rules of the global economy are being rewritten, and this time, the pen isn't only in Washington's hand. The next decade will reveal whether this is a footnote in history or the opening chapter of a new financial era. Either way, what's happening right now, quietly, behind the scenes, will echo for generations. Stay sharp. The world is changing, and the smartest move you can make is to pay attention. If this opened your eyes to what's really happening in global finance, hit that like button and subscribe. We're tracking the stories the mainstream media isn't telling you, the moves that shape your future before you even notice. Drop a comment. Do you think the dollar's dominance is ending, or is this just noise? Let's talk about it. And if you want to go deeper, check out the next video, where we break down what happens if the dollar actually loses reserve currency status. You won't want to miss it. See you there.